Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's installment of Let's Talk, presented by the Visiting Nurse in Hospice for Vermont and New Hampshire. As always, I'm your host, Anthony Knox, and today we're here to talk about the Hospice Volunteer Program with the VNH. It's a program that is so very important within the VNH, and today we have our I'll let him introduce his title, but Nils Fredland, who oversees all of the volunteer programming. So, Nils, why don't you take it away and introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Anthony. I'm really happy to be here. As Anthony mentioned just a moment ago, my name is Nils Fredland, and my titles are myriad here at Visiting Nurse and Hospice. But primary and most relevant to today's conversation is that I am the volunteer coordinator. I also coordinate bereavement services and help to supervise our psychosocial team. So all of those jobs are very satisfying, but among the most satisfying work that I do is coordinating volunteers. And that's what we'll be talking about today. So I just want to share a little bit about my own journey to working in the field of hospice. When I was 19 years old, my brother died of cancer, brain tumor. He was 21, and hospice was part of that experience. And while I don't really remember a lot of the specifics about what hospice did in the home, their presence was felt, and I definitely remember it as a feeling of reassurance and comfort, both to him and to our whole family. Um, and ever since that time, I've kind of had it in my mind that I would eventually overlap with hospice. And after a close to 30-year career in the arts, primarily, I was ready for a career change. And while I didn't have a lot of experience in healthcare, um, I stayed open to the possibilities, and this job presented itself. And so a little bit of the universe leading me in the direction of hospice, and I'm really very happy and honored to have landed here at the VNH. Um, let's see, what else should I cover at this point, Anthony?
No, I think that's good, Nels. I think that just a quick kind of synopsis of what brought you here, and I will say personally, as I'm celebrating my the start of my second year here at VNH, we've been very happy that Nils is on board helping us out with this volunteer program. So very glad that you've joined us, Nils.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. Well,
All
maybe
right.
one thing I could share is I've been here for just over 6 months now. And, when I came on charged with what everyone kind of called a rebuilding of the volunteer program, um, it really became apparent that the pandemic, as it did with, many things, kind of shrunk the world of hospice volunteering, just due to volunteer safety and the inability to visit patients in their homes. And so the volunteer program, which I think in the past, pre-pandemic, was quite robust, had really shrunk down to almost nothing. And when I came on board back in June, um, I spoke to the volunteers that were currently still on the roster, just to get a sense of what their hopes were, what their previous experience had been, um, and we've been building from there. And it's been a really exciting process. So just a few volunteers that were on board when I came, and from there we've doubled in size and are still growing. So there's a lot of interest out there, and there are plenty of opportunities for hospice volunteers now. Um, so, and maybe I'll just mention that the territory that we cover includes, on the Vermont side of the river, Orange, Windsor, and Windham counties. And then on the New Hampshire side of the border, we're in a few towns in Sullivan and Grafton, mostly close to the border. So, if you're listening to this and there's any interest and you're close by, or in one particular area of that service territory, reach out. I'll describe ways to do that later, but there's always a need.
Yeah, well, and so I think that's a perfect segue to jump right into the presentation. So,
Perfect.
So again, take it away.
Thank you so much, Anthony, and feel free to jump in, ask any questions as I go through these PowerPoints. So let's talk. An introduction to hospice volunteering. So I just wanted to start with a slide about what makes hospice volunteering unique, because in the kind of broad picture of volunteer opportunities, I really do think hospice volunteering is unique. It draws a particular kind of individual, and so maybe just these bullet points will help to unpack a little bit of that. First thing I wanted to mention, there are two quotes right here at the top, and when I went through the interview process with members of the leadership team here at VNH, one of the things that really stood out in one of the early conversations was this quote: "A beautiful death is possible." And I think that that's an important part of to kind of hold in yourself as you're coming into work with hospice, is really the belief that that death is a part of life, and that the end of life process, when it's supported in a really conscious way with comfort in mind, can be a beautiful thing. And then another quote that really stood out was from one of the conversations that I had with a new volunteer that has come on board in the last 6 months. And she said, "Being at my father's bedside when he died was heartbreaking, healing, and beautiful. I feel called to hospice work, and hospice volunteering is a first step." So she's not currently working in hospice, but that experience of being with her dad when he died was really powerful, and that that came out in that conversation that I had with her. So just going through the bullet points, the opportunity. So what makes hospice volunteering unique? The opportunity to make a profound impact in a person's end of life journey, and if I could say anything about volunteering in hospice, it's that a certain amount of flexibility is required, a very grounded approach in your own coming to the work, and a spirit of flexibility and openness to what presents to you, because this is not a predictable time in a person's life, and things can change. And just having people that are willing to be present to the situation as it is on the day is an incredible gift. And I think that's the thing that hospice volunteers really bring. And that's profound. The second bullet point speaks to the same thing. So really being in the moment with another individual, fully present to their needs for comfort and emotional support. We'll talk a little bit more about the specifics of what hospice volunteers can offer, but comfort and emotional support are sort of the broad categories. And I think the thing that I would say is the primary skill that a hospice volunteer really needs is this idea of being present. sometimes I've heard it referred to as being a healing presence. And I think, in language that is maybe a little bit more familiar, this idea of really being in the moment. So allowing yourself to kind of settle in and be totally with the the patient or the family member, whoever you happen to be engaging with, and just really connected to what their needs are. Um, that's the role, and that's powerful, and it's a privilege. Um, and then some of the things that I really uh, love from my previous life, professional life as an artistic person, director, choral director, dance caller, is this idea of building community. And one of the things that I really have loved about getting to know the volunteers, both that were on board prior to my coming into the role and also the volunteers that have come on board since, is that there's a real opportunity for connection between volunteers. Obviously, the patient volunteer connection is really important and kind of the central thing to being a hospice volunteer. But there's so much that the volunteers on the VNH team learn from each other. And so trying to bring the skill that I had coming in as a community builder and applying it to the volunteers that have that are part of the hospice program here at VNH has really been a gift. So connection to others who share similar values and a heart for service, meaningful relationships by building community with other volunteers. And there are a couple of things that that are happening right now that I hope are allowing the volunteers to really feel connected to each other. I think it's a really important part. Um, um, and like uh, any activity or endeavor that we engage in, if we can be fully present to it, you never know who you're going to meet, right? And um, in a similar way to being present to patients, being volunteers being really present to each other can create some pretty solid and long-lasting bonds of friendship. So that's an important part, I think. Um, the work can be hard emotionally, and I think it's important in that challenge for the volunteers to really feel like they have the support of VNH, but also the support from each other, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Um,
100%.
and then I love stories. I'm a storyteller. Um, I will sit and listen to someone tell a story with just rapt fascination and attention, um, and and so much of what I hear from the volunteers that go into patient homes is what a gift it is to actually be able to just sit with someone and let them kind of envelop you in their story. Because at the end of life, I think people reach the point where they're processing a lot. Um, the beautiful thing about hospice is that the goal is to provide comfort care to allow the body to relax as much as possible, so that the process of sharing the story of their life can happen. Um, and I think one of the really great things about the volunteer role is the opportunity to really sit with a patient and listen to those stories. Um, in my role, I don't actually get out into patient homes really, so I'm sort of living vicariously through all of the volunteers that are out in the field. But I do get to hear what they experience, and time after time, it is, um, talking about how amazing it is to hear the stories of these patients that they have really the privilege to sit with. And then from a kind of more practical standpoint, hospice care is provided, in our case, in the case of a visiting nurse in hospice, in the home. That's the goal and the primary place where care for hospice patients is provided by what we call an interdisciplinary team. And that includes the clinical team, so the registered nurse, also known as the case manager, our medical director, and then the psychosocial team. I mentioned that earlier, and that includes chaplains, hospice chaplains, and social workers, and then home health aides that kind of straddle the line between clinical and psychosocial. And then the volunteers, and the volunteers are a really, really important part of that overall interdisciplinary approach to hospice care that is the standard in every hospice that provides care. And so we have meetings with this interdisciplinary team on a weekly basis to discuss patient care. Raise issues that are happening, just the team updates each other. In those interdisciplinary group meetings, I'm kind of the mouthpiece for the volunteer corps. And so one of the really great things that I've experienced in those meetings is the opportunity to share the observations that volunteers have made during their visits, and to have those observations really valued and kind of weighted equally with everything else that is put into the mix from the rest of the interdisciplinary team that is providing care. So volunteering is a really, really important part of providing great care to the hospice patients that VNH serves. And I try to communicate that to volunteers, and lacking the opportunity for them to actually be on the meetings, they sort of have to take my word for it. But I'll just say right now to anyone that is listening to this, it's powerful. Volunteering is a really, really important part of what the team does in providing hospice care. And then one more thing about that before we roll into the next slide is hospice is a benefit of Medicare. And within that, Medicare actually requires that 5% of patient-facing care actually come from volunteers. So we do a rough calculation of the number of hours that care is provided by the team, and 5% of that has to come from volunteering. So again, that's I think another thing that makes hospice volunteering unique. So lots of words. Anthony, do you have anything that you want to do you have anything you want to jump in on?
No. I mean, I think you nailed it on the head. And I mean, I think the most unique part of hospice volunteering is the fact of, this is a patient and a family that's going through one of the most challenging times of their lives, versus, potentially volunteering at a hospital where maybe you're, transporting a patient around, or, other volunteer things like a Meals on Wheels, or something along those lines. Like this is as personal of a volunteering as there is. Like there's really nothing else that I think that compares to it. So it is a very unique opportunity to support not only the patient but the family that's also supporting the patient.
Right. I'm glad you mentioned the family. I've kind of focused primarily on stories of volunteers supporting patients, but supporting the family is actually a really important part as well. Sometimes patients at the end of life sleep for up to 23 hours a day. So a lot of times that doesn't preclude having volunteers go into the home, but volunteers will actually be there primarily to support the caregivers who in the context of hospice care can often be at a point where they are exhausted and they really need support and they need the opportunity to be comforted. And volunteers can actually participate quite a bit in that as well. So I'm going to roll into the next slide if it's okay with you, Anthony.
Perfect.
All right, here we go. So hospice volunteering at VNH specifically. So this little blurb is just drawn directly from a note that I send to anyone that expresses an interest. So thank you for your interest in becoming a hospice volunteer with Visiting Nurse and Hospice for Vermont and New Hampshire. Volunteers are a vital part of the VNH team, providing companionship to patients and support to caregivers. We look forward to working with you to match your skills, interests, and talents with the needs of those we serve. It is a creative process full of possibility and meaning, and volunteers frequently say that what they give in service to our patients is matched or exceeded by what they gain from the experience. And that I think really gets at what I've heard from volunteers. I'm going to let that just stand on its own and let you know that we at VNH currently have hospice volunteers who see patients in their homes or at care facilities, long-term care facilities, and also volunteers who support administrative needs in the office. I'm hoping to continue to build that part of our program as an important way that volunteers can also give back. Not every volunteer wants actually to go out into the homes, but they do want to be able to feel like they're giving an essential service in the context of hospice care, and supporting administrative needs is huge, really important. So second bullet, outside of patient visits and administrative support, hospice volunteers are given monthly opportunities to gather as a community. So that speaks to what I shared in the earlier slide about making connections with each other and having opportunities to ask questions and feel supported by the other volunteers on the team. So we have a monthly lunchtime roundtable that gives volunteers the opportunity to share their experiences from the field and give and receive support to each other. That's a hybrid model. So some volunteers come in person, some participate on our platform that we use, WebEx, for virtual meetings. And it's whoever is available to come and whoever has stories to share or requests for support. And it's been a good process so far. I'm looking forward to seeing that grow. We also have a monthly volunteer enrichment to hear presentations from members of the hospice team, participate in book study and group exercises, and to ask questions. So that's an in-person gathering. And we've had a couple of speakers from the hospice team just to present on their particular role. And this is a series that's evolving. So a couple more months under our belts, and I'd probably have more to say. But I think continuing education and the opportunity for volunteers to really come together and learn is an important part of volunteering, hospice volunteering, and also something that I really hope moving forward VNH can provide to anyone that comes on board to volunteer. Anything, Anthony?
No, that's
all right.
Perfect. Let's find out what volunteers can do.
All right, here we go. Slide number 4. So a lot of the questions that I get are, what do hospice volunteers do? And my response to that is often, what can you do? So it really, I'm going to read down this list as a here's an idea of some things, but if there are things that aren't on this list that are things that you do in particular, or have an interest in, or think would be good to share, the possibilities really are kind of endless, and I look forward to those discussions with anyone that wants to consider coming on board to volunteer with VNH. So, with that in mind, reading this list, hospice volunteers can provide companionship to patients. I think that's kind of a blanket statement. I think a lot of the rest of this stuff can fit under the umbrella of companionship, so it's appropriate that that comes right at the top. Provide respite so caregivers and family members can take a break. And I'll say within that, it's important for volunteers to know that they are able to reach the caregivers and to reach me or the VNH hotline if there's a need for support. So there are some times when caregivers and family members actually do leave the home, but volunteers are always provided with the resources that they need. Um, in case something were to happen while the caregivers and family members are away. So lots of conscious thought into how to keep volunteers um, safe and supported out in the field. Reading to patients is a beautiful thing that happens a lot. Looking at magazines, picture books, and scrapbooks with patients. When I first came on board, I shadowed some of the chaplain visits, and I remember visiting a patient up in Bradford, Vermont, and how great it was just to sit at right by her arm as she was sitting in her recliner in her room, looking at a scrapbook of photos of her family and just listening to stories about her grandkids. So really powerful. Play card games, Scrabble, cribbage, etc. with patients. I have one volunteer that goes to see a patient for a few hours weekly on Monday nights, and they play cribbage every week, many games,
That's
and
awesome.
the volunteer gets beat pretty frequently and is delighted to share that in her notes. So yeah, so uh, you know, playing games with patients. And I actually, I was thinking this morning, I wanted to just add puzzles to that. Um, I haven't heard volunteers really talk about that, but I have done some puzzles recently and um, have really enjoyed the kind of dedication to the task, and also the conversation that happens with family and friends over puzzles. So I could totally imagine that being something. Listening to stories and recording important memories. So I mentioned stories in the earlier slide. The recording important memories is something that I've heard commonly referred to as legacy projects. And that can uh, take on a lot of different forms, but just being a record keeper for the stories that you hear, and there can be conscious action put to that if a patient or family is particularly interested in having those stories recorded. So that's certainly something that volunteers could put some effort into and support hospice patients with. Deliver or prepare meals. I will say that it is super important for volunteers to communicate with the team that provides care, just to make sure that all allergies are being factored in to any meal prep or meal delivery. Um, so again, that's just providing support to our volunteer corps, but that's certainly something that volunteers could do. Running errands, uh, important also to say in that context that our volunteers at VNH are not able to transport family members, pets, or patients. So, you know, running errands possible, but there are some restrictions around that. Clerical work, bereavement and support mailings, both of those things fit into the administrative work that I mentioned in office. Um, Crafting, veteran to veteran visits. We don't currently have any veterans on our volunteer roster, but we certainly would love to build a vet to vet program. And then just down at the bottom, there are many, many other options. It really is about what individual volunteers bring to the mix that informs and expands this list. I love that about hospice volunteering and the opportunity to meet and really get to know the volunteers that are currently on board has been a real gift to me. So rolling into the next slide. Okay, so here are the steps. Filling out the volunteer application. And if you're watching this, I don't know if it's not an active link right now, but
you can just for anybody who's watching this live, all you would need to do is just go to vnhcare.org, and it's under one of the tabs. I think specifically under the hospice side of things, you'll be able to find the application for this.
So it is an online application. There is also a way that you can download it and fill out a paper application if that works better for you. But that would be the first step. I get notification of that either through the mail or through my my inbox. At that point, I would reach out to you, schedule a 30-minute interview in person at the office here in White River or via WebEx. Just to get to know any potential volunteers, ask some questions. It really is a kind of free-form conversation, and I have found those conversations to be really delightful and inspiring. Once we agree that we want to move forward, go through the VNH onboarding for new staff. So that's one thing. Volunteers are considered unpaid staff members of VNH. So the onboarding process through human resources is essentially the same as what a new paid staff member would go through. Updating vaccines through Dartmouth Health, a series of background checks. That's all navigated by human resources here at VNH. Once those things are complete, there would be an orientation with me as the volunteer coordinator and anybody else going through a similar sort of timeline. We'll call that the training cohort, to introduce a few things about VNH specifically, and also the online training modules. So next bullet is complete the online training modules. There have been times in the past when the training has actually been in person, requiring a certain number of hours. Lives are very busy. The geography of our service area is broad, and in order for us to be able to draw from the widest area possible to support the patients that we have, the decision was really made to move forward with these online training modules. It is thorough and very, very well done. And it allows for some flexibility for anyone that wants to be part of VNH volunteering. So the online training modules completed on your own time are approximately 18 hours. 6 of those hours are dedicated to working specifically with patients with dementia. And the other 12 hours are more generally about hospice volunteering and what you might encounter. Once those online training modules are complete, and typically we'll leave about, I would say, 3 weeks to a month in order for folks to complete those, we would have an in-person meeting with anyone going through a similar timeline. So the training cohort with me and any members of the VNH staff and leadership that are available to meet the volunteers. At that point, we would take photos, you'd receive your badge, and then a final orientation to prepare for in-person visits, for logging your hours in a system that we use for volunteer support, and documenting after visits. So your notes that you would take, all very important parts. So that gives you an overview of what the steps are. We try to make it efficient, and while I won't say it's easy, I do think it's very rich, and you will feel ready to get out in the field. So here's your hospice volunteer program wrap up. Patients benefit, and so do you. Would you like to be one of the team members who support patients and families in our hospice program? The gift of your time can make a profound difference. Our volunteers agree you will receive much more than you give. So this is an email that goes specifically to the volunteer coordinator. This is my phone number here, 802-556-2887. And this is another path to get to the application that was mentioned on the previous slide. So hopefully gives you plenty of information. I would love to have a conversation. If you had any questions about hospice volunteering, feel free to reach out either via email or give me a call. I'm always happy to talk about the possibilities.
Perfect. Yeah. So
Yeah.
for anybody who's watching live, if you happen to have a question, feel free to type it into the chat box, and we can get it answered for you. And for anybody who is watching the recorded version of this, Nils can jump to the next slide, and you can see again all of his contact information, as well as that volunteer hospice email address a couple slides ago is also another way that it goes directly to Nils. And then if for whatever reason you're having trouble getting a hold of Nils or anything, you can always reach out to me, the community relations manager for VNH, and I can help answer some questions, but most likely will ensure that I get you connected with Nils. So I am not seeing any questions live, but Nils, I want to just thank you for going through the process of becoming a volunteer and kind of different pieces and things that are related to it. And one of the things that Nils emphasized a couple times here was the fact that just because that he put up a list of dozen or so things that people can do. It's whatever your passions are, whatever your skills are related to, things like that. More likely than not, there's somebody within the hospice program that could very much use your skills or abilities or passions in a volunteer capacity to just help better and enrich the remaining time that they have, as well as just being able to work with the families and really ensure that well-rounded support is available. And again, also like Nils said, there's plenty of opportunities for the hospice team, hospice volunteer team, to be able to get together and ask questions, get feedback, get support, brainstorm new ideas, all of these different things. And so it's just a wonderful program to be a part of and to support. And yes, I know it can be tough because it's for people at the end of their life, but it's like Nils said, you get so much more out of it than what you're giving to it. So
well, Anthony, this has really been great. I appreciate the opportunity, and to anyone out there that is watching this, if you're interested, even just a little tickle in your mind of becoming a hospice volunteer, please reach out. I would be more than happy to have a conversation with you, and it would really be a privilege to work with you. So don't hesitate. Pick up the phone, send me an email.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Nils, and thank you everyone for watching, and we'll catch you next time on Let's Talk.
Thanks, Anthony.